Hi there, I'm Ava. I work as an insurance agent, a job that keeps me glued to my desk or on the phone most days. I live in a cozy house that my grandma left me when she passed. It's a bit old-fashioned but filled with memories and comfort. My life's pretty routine: work, home, a bit of gardening, and then some more work. Dating? Who's got the time? After another long day filled with claims and paperwork, the loneliness of the big, quiet house really hit me. That's when I thought, why not try online dating? I took a couple of decent pics in front of the house and some from my trips to Europe last summer, slapped them up on a dating site, and hoped for the best. Barely had I refreshed the page when a message popped up. It was from Ethan. His profile showed a guy with a confident smile, standing in a garage full of cars. The caption said he ran his own car repair shop. Just my type, a guy who knew how to handle tools. We hit it off right from our first chat. Ethan was straightforward, no airs about him. He said, "Hey Ava, I see you've been to Italy. Got any good travel stories?" I laughed, typing back quickly, "If getting lost in Venice and ending up on a private gondola counts, then yeah, loads." "Sounds like my kind of adventure," he replied. And just like that, we kept messaging back and forth. He had a sense of humor that made even a bad day good. Our first date was at a local diner. Nothing fancy, just good burgers and fries. When I saw him waiting outside, leaning against his beat-up truck, he waved and grinned. It was easy to smile back. The conversation flowed as smoothly as the milkshakes we ordered. Ethan was all about his shop and the cars, and I shared tales from the insurance battlefield. But when he talked about his family, his tone changed a bit. "I owe a lot to my mom, you know? She raised me by herself." I didn't think much of it then. I was too caught up in his stories, his laughter, and the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his latest car restoration. By the end of the evening, I was glad I took the plunge into online dating. Ethan was a breath of fresh air, someone who seemed genuinely into the things I cared about. We made plans to meet again, and I went home feeling something I hadn't in a while: excitement. The more we dated, the closer we got, and it didn't take long before we were talking about a future together. He was easy to love, with his quick smiles, and the way he'd fix anything that broke around my house, just like he promised. But as our wedding day neared, Ethan dropped a bit of a bombshell on me. "You know, Ava, my mom and I are really close," he said one evening as we were scrolling through potential wedding venues on his laptop. "I mean, she's pretty much my best friend." I smiled, finding his devotion sweet. "That's really nice, Ethan. It's good to see a man who cares about his family." "Yeah, she's been through a lot, just us two for so many years. She means the world to me." He glanced at me, maybe checking to see if I was okay with this level of attachment. "Of course, I get it," I reassured him, squeezing his hand. I met Maggie a week later at her quaint little house that seemed frozen in another era. Ethan had hyped up how much she was going to love me. But the reality? It was like hitting a wall of ice. She was polite, sure, but there was a stiffness to her smile, a reserve in her hello. During dinner, I tried to make conversation, really I did. "This casserole is delicious, Maggie. Ethan told me you're the best cook." But Maggie turned to Ethan, ignoring my attempt. "Ethan, did you look into that garage space for rent down by Baker Street?" I sat there, stirring my food around the plate, feeling more like a spectator than a part of the family. It didn't get any better as the night went on. Each attempt I made to draw her out was met with brief answers and swift diversions back to Ethan. On our drive home, I couldn't help but express my frustration. "Does your mom not like me?" I felt like she didn't really want to talk to me at all tonight. Ethan was quick to defend her. "Nah, she's just not very good with new people. Give her time, she'll warm up to you." I wanted to believe him. I really did. So, I brushed it off and focused on the wedding plans. But every visit after that was a repeat performance. Maggie's warmth surfaced only when she wanted to know about my financial stability or the house I lived in. "So, Ava," Maggie began one afternoon, a sudden interest lighting up her face as we discussed the wedding guest list. "This house you live in, it's the one you inherited from your grandmother, right?" "Yes, it's been in the family for years," I said, cautious but trying to keep the conversation friendly. "And I suppose you have everything sorted out with your finances? Savings and such?" Her eyes were sharp, assessing. I stiffened, feeling like I was under a microscope. "Yes, I've been very careful with my finances." That's good, that's good. It's important to have a solid foundation. Especially in a marriage," she added, her gaze flickering between Ethan and me. The conversation drifted back to mundane wedding details, but the seed of unease was planted. Maggie's questions lingered in my mind, painting my thoughts with doubt. What was her angle? Was she just being overly protective, or was there something more calculating beneath her questions? Ethan seemed oblivious to these subtleties, always smoothing over any awkwardness with a joke or a change of topic. Mom's just being mom, he'd laugh whenever I brought up how she made me feel. As the wedding day drew near, the excitement I felt was tinged with nerves, not just about the big day, but about everything that was becoming increasingly complicated with Ethan's family. A question that had been nagging at me finally slipped out one evening while Ethan and I were checking off items on our to-do list. "Ethan, how come your dad isn't on the guest list?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I was genuinely curious. He looked up from his list, a frown briefly crossing his face. "My dad? Ava, he left us when I was just a kid. He made his choice, Ava. I don't see any reason to drag up the past now." I nodded, respecting his feelings, but something didn't sit right with me. It felt like there was more to the story, and on a whim, I decided to dig a little deeper. Using a bit of my insurance sleuthing skills, I managed to find a contact number for Ethan's dad, Michael. The next day, while Ethan was at work, I made the call, my heart racing as it rang. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was cautious, reserved. "Hi, Michael? My name's Ava. I'm Ethan's fiancée. We're getting married soon, and I thought you should know." I stumbled through my introduction. There was a pause, a heavy silence that made me think he might just hang up. But then he spoke, his voice laced with a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't quite place. "Ava, that's news. But listen, I think it's best if I stay out of it. Ethan's made it clear he doesn't want me in his life." His words were calm but firm, yet he added something that sent chills down my spine. "Just be careful, Ava. With him and his mother. There's more going on there than you might realize." I stood there for a moment, phone in hand, bewildered. Was he just a bitter ex-husband and father, or was there really something I needed to be wary of? Shaking off the unease, I decided he must just be a little out of his mind, as Ethan had implied. The wedding day arrived, and it was like a dream. Everything was perfect, from the weather to the flowers. But even the most beautiful day couldn't keep the shadows at bay. Maggie, Ethan's mother, was a force to be reckoned with. From the moment the ceremony started, she was ever present, hovering close to Ethan, adjusting his tie, whispering in his ear. At the reception, I hoped we could finally have our moment, but Maggie had other plans. When it came time to cut the cake, she brushed past me, a tight smile on her face. "I'll handle this, dear," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. I am the main hostess, after all. I watched, stunned, as she took the knife and started slicing the cake, her other hand possessively on Ethan's shoulder. The guests clapped, but the applause felt hollow. I felt more like a guest at my own wedding than the bride. Throughout the evening, Maggie made sure to position herself prominently in every photo, always inserting herself between Ethan and me. Her laughter was forced, her joy seemingly more about her victory in maintaining control than about our happiness. Ethan and I settled into my grandmother's house. Everything was going smoothly, or so I thought, until the dynamic shifted dramatically with Maggie's regular intrusions. Every weekend, we'd go over to Maggie's for dinner, and it was like stepping into a minefield. She was all sweet smiles to Ethan while serving up a side of snide remarks to me. "Ava, try the roast. You might learn a thing or two about cooking," she'd say, her voice dripping with a sarcasm that made my skin crawl. Ethan would just chuckle, clueless, or maybe just unwilling to catch the barbs. "Mom's right. Nobody cooks like her," he'd laugh, completely missing the tension. One Sunday, as she filled Ethan's plate with a heap of mashed potatoes, she shot me a look that could chill coffee. "Darling, make sure Ava takes some notes. She might finally get it right." Ethan roared with laughter, not seeing the hurt in my eyes. "Good one, Mom." 3 months into our marriage, I came home from work to find Maggie on my doorstep, her suitcases piled beside her like some fortress wall. "Ava, dear, I'm feeling unwell, and it's just not safe for me to be alone anymore. I hope you don't mind if I stay here for a while." Before I could even process the request, Ethan came rushing over, wrapping his arms around her. "Of course, Mom. You're always welcome here." Just like that, she moved in. It was as if I had no say in my own home. Maggie took over the house with an iron fist and a velvet glove for Ethan. She did nothing around the house, claiming her health was too frail, leaving me to pick up the slack. My home quickly felt more like a prison, and Maggie was the warden. In the evenings, the living room turned into their private club. They'd watch TV together while I was left to my own devices, feeling more like a ghost than a wife in my own home. Weekends were even worse. They'd go shopping without me, as if I didn't exist. One evening, I gathered my courage at dinner. As we sat at the table, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Maggie, do you have any idea when you might be feeling better? To maybe go back home?" The room fell deathly silent. Ethan's fork clattered to his plate as he stared at me, his face contorting in anger. "Are you trying to kick my mom out?" he exploded, his voice filling the room with a cold fury I hadn't seen before. "No, Ethan, that's not what I meant. I was just asking because..." But he didn't let me finish. He stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him. Maggie sat there, a smug smile playing on her lips, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Looks like you put your foot in it, dear," she taunted, her voice low and menacing. I sat there, stunned and alone, the clinking of cutlery echoing my shaking hands. What was happening? How had my life turned into this nightmare? One morning, I was pulling out my favorite blouse for work when I noticed it looked off. The color was faded, the fabric rough, and the seams slightly torn. Puzzled, I dug through my wardrobe and found more of my clothes in similar states of ruin. "That's odd," I muttered to myself, examining a particularly discolored sweater. Maggie, who was always buzzing around, chimed in with a too-sweet tone. "Oh, dear, that's my fault. I mixed up the laundry last week, must have used the wrong detergent. You know how it is, these things happen." Her words dripped with faux concern, but the glint in her eyes said otherwise. It was clear, this was no accident. This was on purpose. And sure enough, none of Ethan's clothes showed any signs of damage. When I confronted Ethan about it later that day, his reaction was dismissive at best. "You know how Mom is. She's getting older, mistakes happen. Looks like you're not taking good enough care of your stuff, Ava." His words stung, and I felt a cold realization settling in. I was alone in this. As days turned into weeks, more of my things started to mysteriously deteriorate. My favorite lipstick found smashed, my skincare creams diluted, Maggie's tactics grew bolder. The strain was unbearable, and one evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Ethan, this can't be a coincidence anymore. Your mother, she's doing this on purpose. She's ruining my things," I exclaimed, my voice tinged with desperation. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then, after a moment, he sighed. "Look, Ava, maybe you need a break from all this stress. Hey, I know, I've got just the thing. I got us a gift, a weekend trip, a mountain hike. It'll be good for you." My heart lifted at the idea. Really? Just the two of us? That sounds wonderful, Ethan. His face shifted uncomfortably. Well, actually, I was thinking, it could be a great chance for you and Mom to patch things up. She's excited about the trip too. My heart sank. You want me to go hiking with your mother? After everything? It's either that or you don't really care about making our family work, he shot back, a harsh edge to his voice that I hadn't heard before. I was trapped. So, I agreed, defeated and utterly drained. When I told Maggie, her response was unnervingly cheerful. That sounds lovely, dear. We'll have such a good time. She beamed, her satisfaction evident. That night, as I packed my backpack, the weight of what lay ahead felt heavier than any mountain gear. The thought of spending days in the wilderness with Maggie was daunting. The morning of the hike was crisp and cool, the air fresh with the scent of pine and earth. As we set out with our group, Maggie seemed unusually pleasant, chatting with other hikers and even sharing jokes. For the first few hours, everything went smoothly. The scenery was breathtaking, with vast landscapes stretching out under a brilliant blue sky. Maggie kept pace and didn't complain, which eased some of my tension. Maybe, just maybe, this could be a new beginning for us. However, as the terrain became more challenging, Maggie began to slow down, her breaths turning heavy. Ava, darling, I need to rest for a bit. Go on, I'll catch up. She gasped, stopping to lean against a boulder. I'll stay with you for a bit. We can go slow, I said, settling next to her. After a short rest, we attempted to catch up with the group, but Maggie's pace was slow, and it wasn't long before we were alone. The sounds of our companions faded into the distance. How far do you think they've gone? Maggie asked, her voice tinged with worry. Please check from that rock over there. You might get a better view. As I climbed the rock, focused on locating our group, I felt a sudden, sharp shove from behind. My feet lost their grip, and I tumbled forward, the ground rushing up to meet me as I blacked out. When I regained consciousness, the pain hit me like a wave. My arms were scraped and bruised, throbbing with each heartbeat. Worse, my leg was twisted at an odd angle, pain flaring with even the slightest movement. Panic set in as I realized Maggie was gone, along with my backpack that had my phone, water, and food. Maggie! I screamed, hoping she was nearby, that this was some terrible mistake. But there was no answer, just the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. As dusk approached, I knew I couldn't stay on the ground, the risk of wild animals was too real. Wincing with every movement, I managed to pull myself onto a large rock, where I spent a chilling, miserable night, shivering and waiting for dawn. At first light, I forced myself off the rock, pain shooting through my leg. I had to find our trail, had to get back to where the bus would meet us. Every step was agony, but the thought of being left behind drove me forward. Hours passed, each one a test of my will. Finally, I heard voices. A group of hikers appeared like a mirage through my tears of pain and relief. Help! Please, I need help! I cried out, my voice hoarse. They didn't waste time with more questions. One of them radioed for help while the others made me as comfortable as they could. Eventually, rescue services arrived, and I was transported to a hospital, the pain a constant companion. I woke up to the sterile whiteness of the hospital room, the beeping of machines punctuating the silence. My injuries ached, but the pain was dulled by relief. I was alive, rescued, and far from the perilous cold of the mountain. Tears of happiness rolled down my cheeks, not just from the pain, but from the sheer joy of survival. With trembling fingers, I reached for the phone on the bedside table. My first call was to Ethan. My heart pounded as I dialed the number from memory, rehearsing the words in my mind. He needed to know the truth about his mother, about what happened. Ethan, it's me, I started, my voice quivering. I need to tell you something important. Your mom, she pushed me off a rock and left me there. His response came fast and fierce, a torrent of anger that I hadn't anticipated. You're lying, he yelled into the phone. My mom told me everything. She said you abandoned her up there and faked your injuries. How could you accuse her of such a thing? I'm not lying, Ethan. It's the truth. She left me there alone. My plea cracked with emotion. You're just trying to tear us apart. I can't believe you'd stoop this low. You know what? I don't want to see you. I want a divorce. His words were like daggers, and before I could respond, he hung up. Stunned, I lay back against the pillows. His words echoed in my mind, a harsh reminder of the tangled web I was caught in. As I processed the shock, a thought surfaced, the warnings from Ethan's father, Michael. Maybe he would understand, maybe he could help. I found his number and dialed with shaky hands. Michael, it's Ava. I need to talk to you, it's urgent, I said as soon as he answered. He was at the hospital within the hour, his expression grave. We sat in the small, cramped space of the hospital room, and I told him everything. Michael listened intently, his brow furrowed in concern. When I finished, he sighed deeply. I've always known she was too attached to Ethan, but this is something else. She once tried to harm me too, did something to my car brakes. Wanted Ethan to have everything. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I had no proof, just suspicions. Nothing concrete enough to take to the authorities, he explained, his voice heavy with regret. We need to do something, Michael. We can't let her get away with this, I insisted, the resolve hardening in my voice. That night, lying in the dim glow of the hospital room, I called my mother. It took some persuasion, but she agreed to play a part in the plan we were forming. Mom, just casually mention to Ethan that I'm dying. Say the injuries were worse than they thought. I instructed her, my voice low. The morning after my call with my mother, the hospital room's door swung open. I braced myself as Ethan and Maggie strode in, their faces a mix of faux concern and barely concealed eagerness. I lay there, my breathing shallow, feigning the brink of death as we had planned. Oh, Ava, you look terrible, Maggie said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, but her eyes glinting with something akin to triumph. I moaned weakly, keeping my eyes half closed as Ethan hovered by the bedside, his expression conflicted but mostly impatient. Maggie leaned closer, lowering her voice, but not enough. Everything's going as planned, Ethan. Soon, all this, her house, her money, it'll all be yours. Ethan glanced around nervously before kissing his mother on the cheek. I'm so tired of all this drama, he muttered. It'd be easier if she just went quickly. My heart pounded at their words, a mixture of fear and fury coursing through me, but I held still, waiting for the final piece to fall into place. And to think, Maggie chuckled quietly, her cold breath brushing my face. It was so easy to push her off that cliff. She actually thought I was tired. And when I told the others she'd gone back on another bus, they believed it. That was the moment Michael chose to enter, his timing perfect. Got all that, have you? He announced loudly, holding up his phone, which had been recording their conversation. The color drained from Ethan and Maggie's faces as they realized what had happened. Ethan's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out, while Maggie's initial shock quickly morphed into a scowl. She made a move as if to snatch the phone, but Michael stepped back, blocking her path. The police are on their way, Michael stated firmly. I sat up then, throwing off the guise of weakness. And here's something else for you, I said, holding out the divorce papers to Ethan. His shock turned to horror as he took the documents, his hands shaking. You'll pay for everything. All of it, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Ethan turned to his father, desperation in his voice. You can't let them lock me up, Dad. You'd have no one left. Michael's expression was one of utter disdain. Actually, I will have someone. Ava's pregnant. And I will make sure my grandchild and Ava have everything they need. The revelation hit everyone like a bolt. Ethan staggered as if struck, his face ashen, while Maggie's eyes widened in disbelief. Before more could be said, the police arrived. They listened briefly to Michael's explanation, checked his recording, and then handcuffed Ethan and Maggie. As they were led away, the reality of their situation finally seemed to dawn on them. In the months that followed, the trial was swift. The evidence was undeniable, and both Ethan and his mother were sentenced to significant terms. The house became peaceful again, and with Michael's support, I prepared for the new life I was about to bring into the world. When my son was born, it was with a sense of relief and renewal. Michael was there, beaming, as he held his grandson for the first time. "He's going to have a good life," he promised, and I believed him.